show today is on the NATO summit that is taking place in Lithuania, with a series of important meetings being held. Well, the big international story of the day. A NATO summit is underway in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, and top of the agenda is the Ukraine war. US President Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will meet at the summit later tonight. But here's what's happened so far. NATO states have said Ukraine's place lies within the alliance, but the conditions for its induction have to be met first, and that they would not be drawn into a time frame. Zelensky is clearly not amused, terming the delay absurd. The Ukrainian president says there seems to be no readiness to invite Ukraine to NATO or to make it a member. He added, a window of opportunity is being left to use Ukraine's NATO membership as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Russia. Uncertainty is weakness, he says. While Kiev accepts that it cannot join NATO while it is at war with Russia because it wants a clear signal from NATO members about future membership, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said, while U.S. President Joe Biden will be straightforward in his meeting with the Ukrainian president at the NATO summit, he plans to listen carefully to what Zelensky has to say with regard to Kiev's stalled membership. The U.S. is clear. NATO would be at war with Russia if Ukraine were to join the bloc now. Taking a softer stance later, Zelensky said, I understand why some are afraid of Ukraine joining NATO. It's because nobody is willing to have a world war. But he added that he had three priorities: a new weapons package, an invitation for NATO membership, and security guarantees for Ukraine on the way to NATO. Now, reports suggest President Biden and the G7 leaders are due to make a major announcement on boosting Kiev's military capabilities. Predictably, Russia has warned against the West ramping up security guarantees to Ukraine. A Kremlin spokesperson said such actions could lead to extremely negative consequences. Ukraine says it is looking to deploy F-16 fighter jets by March 2024, even though no government is committed to providing Ukraine with the US-made aircraft. Interestingly, a picture went viral on the social media today. It shows Ukrainian President Zelensky standing all alone, while other leaders at the NATO summit can be seen animatedly talking to each other. Many have wondered if this picture reflects the real story of war-torn Ukraine. Many have asked, have Ukraine and Zelensky been left alone to fight a devastating, debilitating and seemingly endless war with Russia? A war that many argue is in effect NATO's war against Putin, with Ukraine as collateral damage. We're asking on the show tonight, with no NATO membership in sight and an aggressive Russia pounding it every day, where does Ukraine go from here? And what does all of this mean for the Russia-Ukraine war?
Discussed our expectations from the NATO summit. An important result here is the recognition that Ukraine does not need a map on its way to membership on its path, and I also thank you once again, gents, for these important steps. And I know how many different conversations and agreements took place along the way, and I thank you for this recognition. We have come a long way in cooperation with NATO, and our soldiers have the most fresh experience of cooperation with various members of the alliance. The skillful use of NATO weapons by our soldiers has already proven that global democracy is stronger than any terrorist threats against us. At the same time, even during a full-scale war with Russia, Ukraine continues implementing reforms within the framework of our path of integration into the EU.
Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. Allies reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This will change Ukraine's membership path from a two-step process to a one-step process. And we will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when allies agree that conditions are met. The decision to remove the requirement for a membership action plan, which actually means that instead of two steps to become a member, there will now be one step. And we also made it clear that the invitation will be issued when conditions are met. On the membership issue, I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine.
We just concluded the first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council, and all our allies agreed Ukraine's future lies in NATO. That's not a surprise to any of us, I don't think. I hope it's not a surprise to you, Mr. President. Allies all agreed to lift the requirements for membership action plan for Ukraine and to create a path to NATO membership while Ukraine continues to make progress on necessary reforms. But we're not waiting for that process to be finished to make the long-term commitments that we're making to Ukraine's security. Vladimir and I shouldn't be so familiar. Mr. Zelensky and I talked about the kind of guarantees we could make in the meantime when I was in Ukraine and when we met in other places. And so today, the long-term commitments we're making are backed up by the notion that in the meantime, we're going to provide security to Ukraine for its needs and against any aggression that may occur.
We'll provide security to Ukraine. We will continue to offer our full support to Ukraine, but membership of NATO is clearly not on the table at this point in time. What does that mean for Ukraine? What does that mean for the Russia-Ukraine war? Let's try and understand this with our guests. Joining me on the show, former diplomat Ambassador Suresh Goyal, defense expert Major General Sanjay Soy, and Major General Sudhakar Ji, defense and geopolitical expert, is also with us. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, let me start with you. Earlier at this summit, we saw Zelensky express his utter frustration, calling the delay in Ukraine's induction as a NATO member absurd and unprecedented. And he went on to say that a window of opportunity is being left to use Ukraine's NATO membership as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Russia. Uncertainty is weakness, he says. How would you react to this statement that's been made by Zelensky and the fact that NATO members have made it abundantly clear that as long as this war is on, Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO because it would mean practically NATO being at war with Russia?
Neha, you see, the problem appears to be that Zelensky is not, repeat, not a professional politician or a professional even administrator or whatever you want to call it. If he had been in the national politics for some time, he should have understood that there are many delays, many problems for Ukraine to become member of NATO, which were clear even in 2022 when Russia actually objected. And if you recall, they actually sent the forces into Ukraine primarily because Ukraine was insisting on becoming the member of NATO in contradiction with first applying for the membership of the European Union, which could have done easily. And that, I think, should have gone through. And it would have really fulfilled his dream to become part of Europe. The problem also is that Zelensky considers himself Europe. He does not consider himself part of Russia, while Russia, because of the various reasons, they have already clearly said, Putin said in 2003, that Ukraine is not a nation state. Ukraine has always been historically part of Russia. That's what Putin said. I have no personal knowledge, but they consider Europe. And that's the reason that historical defense ties between Ukraine and Russia are something. There were many manufacturing facilities from Russia in Ukraine when they were part of the Soviet Union. And therefore, for Russia, for Ukraine particularly to become member of NATO was suicidal. They would never ever agree to this. And Zelensky should have realized that. And even if his ambition was to become part of Europe, European Union should have been the pathway. Therefore, I think Joe Biden and the other members in NATO, some of them, they realize what Zelensky is. Incidentally, I hope you know that he was actually a stand-up comic before he
That's
became the
right.
president. So
That's right.
he
We
probably
have a former stand-up comic who's now the chief minister of an important state, Punjab.
I shall keep quiet. But anyway,
What I'm saying is
this,
that comics can make good leaders. I don't think it is necessarily a
course.
disqualification.
No, I agree. But the point really here is that some people understand faster than the other. Zelensky has not been able to understand that this is not the world stage. The security and safety of his own people is the first priority. Western nations, particularly the USA, have made Ukraine the battleground where all kinds of weapons are being tested. Personnel from Ukraine are dying in the war. It is the property of Ukraine which is getting destroyed. And I think under the circumstances, a bit of understanding and diplomacy, a slightly different approach would have worked better rather than a kind of a confrontational approach that nothing but the NATO membership. That, and we have now seen by saying that, all right, we'll make it a one action process, one step process, so you will save time. But when we invite you, it depends on us. Clearly, there is no agreement on making Ukraine the member of NATO, particularly when Ukraine is already at war with Russia. Why should NATO want to actually invite Russia to a war? That would be harakiri. So anyway, all said and done, the NATO meeting is going to end again with an assurance of supplying all kinds of weapons and allowing the Ukrainian nationals to go and fight in the war. But I don't think that NATO membership is going to come so easily. I think Zelensky should have understood it and changed the approach.
Okay.
Neha.
So you're saying that it is essentially a lack of experience and pragmatism on his part that has resulted in him making these statements, showing so much haste and frustration, but NATO's position is understandable. Let me go across to Major General Sanjay Soy. Sir, do you believe that NATO's position is justified? Because they are very clear that if Ukraine were to be inducted as a NATO member while the war with Russia is on, it would practically mean NATO going to war with Russia. But at the same time, and I'm playing the devil's advocate here, many would argue that, even though this, the fact that Ukraine had been insisting on NATO membership, many say has also been the primary reason for this war, for Russia attacking Ukraine. But, the counter argument to that is that at the end of the day, isn't this, for all practical purposes, already NATO's war against Putin by proxy, with Ukraine being collateral damage of sorts? How do you see Zelensky's frustration over the delay in its NATO membership and NATO taking the stand that, look, you will have to wait, it cannot happen at this point in time?
Absolutely, Neha. In fact, Zelensky's frustration is quite visible, and not once but many times he has mentioned in the past also. And if you see that Ukraine had first applied for membership of NATO in 2008, then the government changed in 2010, again they changed their mind, and then 2019 the parliament passed the act to be part of the NATO, and then finally September 22 they have formally applied for the membership of NATO. I mean, imagine they have gone to the war, Russia has attacked them, the war has started because of this action that they are joining NATO. And today when the NATO says, okay, we are with you, we will support you from outside, you go ahead, you fight, you die, you let your country be destroyed, we'll supply you the weapons, but will not get involved directly with Russia. I mean, they are fighting a proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. Ukraine is the one which is suffering. The people are become refugees. The whole eastern Ukraine has been lost. The Crimea was already lost. and people are forced to flee to the other neighboring countries. The economy is totally destroyed. They are totally dependent on the arms and ammunition being received from the Western allies, and they counter-offensive going nowhere, because how many people can they produce to fight? I mean, imagine the depth of the Russia, their own weapon industry, the arms industry. They are Atmanirbhar, I would say, in that fate. They have a tremendous manpower. They thought of it. They made a defensive line, and the counteroffensive is going nowhere. And when now that Russia, NATO says there's no timeline for you, you will support you from outside, the Zelensky feels cheated. Ukraine feels cheated. The people will feel cheated. That I mean, we are the fools. I think that's the correct word, to have gone into the war with Russia for these reasons, and now nobody's there with us except they're giving the arms and ammunition. And arms also, if you see, gradually they are giving. They are not giving any offensive weapon because still they are scared that
no F-16 so far.
Russia.
Correct me if I'm wrong, sir. No F-16 so far, something that Zelensky has been asking for a very long time.
Absolutely. There are no offensive weapons. They are giving only defensive weapon system. They are worried that if Ukraine goes slightly far, they start attacking Russian cities and inside the Russian territory. They don't want that to happen. I mean, they don't want to antagonize Russia so much that at some point of time, out of frustration, Russia start attacking one of the European countries. They are the closest with Russia. And other thing, I find it very funny. Indirectly, they are funding Russia, and they are, in fact, supporting Ukraine with arms. They are buying Russian oil, which is keeping the Russian economy going on. Russia has not suffered economically much. And they are producing arms and ammunition, and on the other hand, they are supplying Ukraine with arms. I mean, it's very, very different paradox. I mean, very, very conflicting thing which is happening, and it's everybody seeing their own self-interest, nothing else. The East European countries want Ukraine to join NATO, but US, Germany, and some other countries, they don't want to get into that conflict with Russia. Though, Neha, I just wanted to say one more thing. Like, with the Russian offensive, probably NATO has got benefited in the sense that now Sweden and Finland, they have left the years of isolation. They wanted to be non-aligned. They didn't want to join any military bloc. They are now joining. Finland is already part of it. Sweden is also just a step ahead from joining NATO. So these are some of the things I thought that which has happened, Neha.
Absolutely. And, the question really is, has Ukraine been thrown to the wolves by the West? We've got two very interesting and differing perspectives so far from Ambassador Suresh Goyal and Major General Sanjay Soy. Let me now go across to Major General Sudhakarji. Sir, it's interesting. Major General Sanjay Soy says, it is understandable that Zelensky and Ukraine feel cheated today because, NATO has been promising for the longest time that Ukraine would be inducted as a member. Like I said at the start of the show, many would argue that the reason that Russia attacked Ukraine in the first place is because NATO kept dangling the carrot of membership before Ukraine, and Putin was worried that NATO would be practically at his doorstep if Ukraine were to become a member. Of course, I am not trying to justify Putin's aggression any which way. However, the question is, even as NATO says, we are not going to get involved in a war with Russia, even as we continue to support Ukraine in every way that we can. Like I asked earlier, isn't Ukraine already fighting NATO's war with Russia? Has Ukraine been reduced to being cannon fodder or collateral damage of sorts in this war?
Neha, good evening. Thank you for getting me to your show. Brilliant question, as always. How do I respond? The canvas is so huge. The quick answer to your question, let me make the beginning of my response by saying the answer to your question is yes. It has reduced itself to, for lack of correct expression, like the usage you made use of, a cannon fodder. It has made itself to be a very unproductive proxy component. It has made itself to be a tool which is being excessively being exploited by forces which are supposed to take care of the interest of Ukraine. Now, having said that, let's go back in time so that the viewers also get a larger perspective. The complete conflict, I would actually thank Ambassador Goel and the general officer for having given a very comprehensive perspective. I must say that they deserve to have the last say on the subject. But let me give a quick perspective. The genesis of NATO way back in 1949, why did it come into existence? The genesis of Warsaw Pact, late 50s, why did it come into existence? During the Cold War, the bipolar world, the threat of USA and the NATO forces was that of USSR, and USSR threat was from the NATO forces and the transatlantic relations or the countries. So after 1991, when the USSR got disintegrated, at the cost of repeating very commonly known subject or issues, I must flag the issue that in the Cold War 2.0, much against the aspiration of the global order, that some liberal rules-based international order is going to be experienced, what we have seen is actual polarization of the global order. The global order has actually witnessed global disorder, and global disorder is converging and manifesting in the existing or the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. If we call Ukraine as a proxy of the NATO, we can also, in the same analogy, call Russia as a proxy of China. Let's be mindful that there are many things which are happening which we are not able to understand. I am actually in the shortest possible response. Let me give a quick one or two liners. If the Western alliance is serious and sensitive to the global peace and harmony, then the answer would lie in going in for European security architecture along the line of Eastern Europe, which, logically speaking, when the Warsaw Pact dissolved way back in 91-92, there was no logic of the NATO actually existing. If NATO existed, then actually it existed on the paradigm of contradiction. When I'm saying this, then the Secretary of USA, James Baker, when he visited and met Mikhail Gorbachev, giving an assurance that consequent to the collapse of the Berlin Wall, when the East and the West Germany, they were merging with each other, he had given an assurance, it is there in a white paper, it is there in many notable documents, that the NATO alliances will not exceed or go beyond an inch of ground beyond the line of East Germany. If that was the kind of assurance, at that point in time, NATO started with 12 members. In 1991, it had 16 members. By 1999, it had 19 members. As on today, counting the last membership, it has already risen to 32. So most of the Warsaw Pact countries, consequent to their dissolution, they have also joined, for example, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. These are all erstwhile Warsaw part of the Soviet Union nation state. If they have joined NATO, will any country in place of Russia not be concerned about the security threat which is so imminent? It is not potential. It is a realistic threat. And mind you, in 2008, when the NATO meeting was taking place in Munich conference, if I remember correctly, maybe Ambassador Goel will correct me if I am going wrong, it has come out in many, many notable documents and books. It is nobody other than Putin had given the red line. He had spelled out the red line to then the President of USA, Mr. George Bush, that please, for God's sake, for heaven's sake, do not cross the red line. Do not take the name of Ukraine. If you do that, then my existence is going to be under a big cloud and big question. So that is the third part I wanted to highlight. Neha, the important issue is whether it is USSR or it is the present Russia. Russia is an extension of the erstwhile superpower. Mind you, Ukraine used to have a major share of the nuclear arsenal. They have been handed over, consequent to an agreement to Russia. And Russia is the overall responsible nation state for the nuclear arsenal. Ukraine used to be the center of gravity even during the time of USSR by virtue of the land connectivity, the strategic importance, the minerals, the different kinds of, the food grains which are produced, and oil, gas, name a thing, it was there. And also the manufacturing hub of USSR. How can Russia, as an extension of USSR, consequent the disintegration in 1991, close its eyes despite having given red lines time and again to the Western Alliance? Therefore, it brings me to my conclusion of my statement to say that if they want a kind of a NATO membership to be given, then it is going to be on the altar of a World War III. And this World War III is going to be a huge disaster fraught with usage of nuclear weapons. Now, let's not unnecessarily satisfy ourselves by saying that tactical nuclear weapons are no strategic. Nuclear weapon per se is a strategic weapon. It is only a preface that we are using tactical weapon, meaning to say that the damage is going to be limited. No. The damage is going to be extensive. There are factors of wind, there are factors of weather, there are factors of contiguity of geography.
And Putin loses no opportunity to dangle the nuclear threat. He has said time and again, we will use every means at our disposal to defend our interests. Thank you, sir, for that historical perspective on NATO. So the question really is, have red lines been crossed? Many would say that NATO's eastern expansion is what lies at the heart of the Russia-Ukraine war. Going back to Ambassador Suresh Goyal at this point, Zelensky first, as we discussed, expressed his frustration, but later he also softened his stance while talking to the media and said, I understand why some are afraid of Ukraine joining NATO. It's because nobody is willing to have a world war. But on a slightly different note, Ambassador, I'd love to have your thoughts on that one picture that's been going viral on the social media. If I could just request my director to pull up that picture. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Here you see Zelensky standing alone, looking almost entirely isolated, as other NATO leaders are busy animatedly talking to each other. Well, you're a diplomat, Ambassador Goyal. I'm sure you'd say don't read too much into that picture. But, you know, despite all the claims that we will continue to support you, we'll continue to offer financial and military assistance to Ukraine, there are many who are asking, has the West all but left Zelensky and Ukraine alone to fight this devastating, debilitating and seemingly endless war against Russia? I mean, you know, this picture seems to be loaded.
And totally blatant in terms of bio. Otherwise, yes, you are right.
That's much appreciated,
if I were a serving
sir.
diplomat, I wouldn't have been able to say it. But the fact is that Zelensky as a person, I don't think, and from the feedback from my friends in Europe, I don't think Zelensky is really accepted very much by Europe as a European leader. I'm saying it very carefully, but the fact is that he does not get absorbed in the community. Most of the people hold him responsible for pushing Ukraine into the war situation because of his personal ambition. When he was the president, nobody expected that he would basically take on Russia in the manner that he did. Europe went along basically, first of all, because they do consider Ukraine to be part of Europe. And number two, that was a way to challenge Russian presence, Russian influence, without costing them anything in terms of personal, etc. Having said this, there is one great problem now in the situation here. And that is simply that If the World War III does break out, it won't be limited to Europe. The earlier two wars were basically Germany and Europe. This war is going to be China and Europe and Asia. And that's the reason that the USA is talking in terms of NATO plus plus. And they want other countries to become part of NATO expanded presence in the Indo-Pacific. I've said enough, I think, on that account. And therefore, what is happening now in Ukraine is very worrisome, because if it really blows into a full-fledged war, many more countries are going to get involved. And China, which is already trying to basically displace or replace, whichever way you look at it, USA, the world power, is going to come forward and use its own firepower, influence. And therefore, at least I am looking into a very ghastly and very horrible picture if this thing doesn't stop soon. Neha.
You're quite right, sir. The war is in its 17th month now. There seems to be no end in sight, and Ukraine has already paid a very heavy price. How much longer will this go on for remains the big question. And thank you for your candor. It is much appreciated, like I said.
Thank you.
Let me go across to Major General Sanjay Soy at this point. It's very interesting what the ambassador there said. You know, in the last 16, 17 months, we have seen Zelensky at several international fora, either being physically present or addressing many fora, including the United Nations, online, virtually. And almost every time he's received a standing ovation. But, you know, is that just optics? Because Ambassador Goel seems to think that, you know, for all the applause and the pats on the back that he may have received from the West, the reality is that Zelensky is yet to be fully accepted by NATO leaders, by the West, as a European leader or a European ally. How do you see this dichotomy, if I may put it that way?
Absolutely, Neha. It's a very, very valid point and very, very valid question. And I fully endorse the views of Ambassador Goel that he is not considered as a leader. In fact, I would say that more of that applause and standing ovations were for Russia. I mean, so that they see that, oh my God, Ukraine is getting so much of support. The United Nations is with him. Whole Europe is, EU is with him. America is with him. He's addressing the American Congress. I mean, one of very few leaders have addressed the American Congress. So those are the basically a psychological warfare, I would say, aimed at Russia. And here also I would like to add that the whole thing, if you see, Neha, is America's game. In fact, if you see, if I see from American point of view, right, America is taking care of its national interest. It realized that after 1991, when the Russia disintegrated as General Sudhakarji had brought out, and then Putin remounted. I mean, it brought some strength. The economy was on the road. Absolutely, they were doing well. They started interfering in the matters in Middle East, in the Syria, in other countries, in Iran, supported Iran. So and China and Russia, both were trying to join hands together, and Russia was supplying arms to China, and whether S-9, a lot of anti-air defense weapon system and other aircrafts and all. So the only way for America was to deal them one by one. China entangled with Taiwan and created a thing there, and Russia, they entangled Russia with Ukraine without coming into front and let the Ukraine go do whatever, whether they get destroyed, whether they lose manpower, it doesn't matter to them. Their national interest is that they tried to bring the Russia on the knees, which actually I feel that they failed to do so, because it turned out to be counterproductive. Their economy has not gone so bad because they are still able to sell oil through various channels. Europe is still buying oil and gas from them, whatever means they are buying. So they are able to survive this American strategy, and now it is becoming counterproductive. The effects are being felt in Europe. Europe is going through severe economic crisis. The people are now started questioning. We know that what is happening in France. We know in other European countries that things are not so good. So it is very tough challenge. I don't know whether the strategy has succeeded or it has become a counterproductive, because Russia, I have some friends in Russia. I find that their WhatsApp is working. Their people keep claiming that their a total autocratic ruler is not so. Things are happening. The markets are open. Everything is happening normal. Yes, some difficulties they are facing, but economy is not totally crashed, Neha.
Despite the sanctions, is what you're saying. Okay, that's interesting. Major General Sudhakar ji, let me now come to you as we wrap up this discussion. Zelensky has said at the NATO summit that he has essentially three priorities. He wants a new weapons package from NATO, an invitation for NATO membership, which certainly is not coming anytime soon, and security guarantees for Ukraine on the way to NATO. How much of this do you really see materializing? And essentially, with NATO membership off the table for now, where do you see the Russia-Ukraine war going from here?
Yeah, excellent question. But this question should come out in the mainstream channel of our country. You're doing a wonderful job. Okay, very quick response. No NATO membership, as per my analysis, should be expected in favor of Ukraine as of now. Number one, because it's fraught with very serious, dangerous signatures of the conflict breaking out without having any proxies in between. That is going to become a world war. Now, having said this, I hope partially I've been able to answer your question quickly, because I want to give a larger picture, if you allow me. The bigger picture is that no superpower would ever expect or accept losing its power and status. America in past 25-30 years, let's say post 1991, contrary to the perception of the world order, in Cold War 2.0, has shown all elements of a declining power. Never, not even once, wherever it has invaded, be it Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Lebanon, any place, there is no notable milestones to call worth its name to be a successful milestone for a superpower. Under those circumstances, I personally feel in the declining status of a superpower, this entire activity of this Russia-Ukraine war, if we have to justify in retrospect, I would say that there is a bigger objective which is under play by the superpower to restore its status. What is that bigger objective? The bigger objective is the double containment, as per my analysis. What is the double containment? The first containment is, during this Cold War 2.0, Europe was becoming too powerful, and it started challenging, showing eyes and teeth to the transatlantic powers. And it came to such a level, such a status, that Germany at some point in time couldn't care less. Post the agreement they had signed in 1974, their dependency had gone up to such a level with Russia, the very nation against which it had fought during Second World War, that it couldn't care less about the transatlantic diktats of the USA and Canada. So, next point I wish to highlight is, what does it mean? It means that the Europe at certain point in time, because of inexpensive fuel and gas coming from Russia and inexpensive expenditure on the security architecture, because the security is to be provided by the NATO alliance, that is primarily USA, the Europe had actually become stronger, and therefore they started showing or asserting themselves, and hence there was a need for the transatlantic powers to consolidate. How could they consolidate? So consolidation, as per my understanding, was to weaken Europe to such an extent that that they could actually utilize this particular opportunity to weaken Russia as well. So therefore, double containment essentially entailed weakening Europe by reducing the dependency of the Europe on Russia as far as the oil and other products are concerned, as also commenced the process of militarization. This is one part. Second part is about the Russia. Russia also has been weakened to large an extent, and it has been pushed to be embraced by none other than China. So double containment policy, if not 100%, I would say America has succeeded in actually achieving more than 50%. Remaining 50%, we have to wait and see how it pans out. Last but not the least, Neha, if you allow me, that the rising China has been unanimously accepted world over as the biggest challenge, the world #1 challenge and the enemy. And America has taken China as #1 challenge in its national security document. And India, by virtue of the geographical contiguity, we are the facing brunt of it. Hence, there is a requirement for India to tweak its foreign policy. By saying so, I don't mean to say that India should decouple its relationship with Russia, because that is going to be a disaster. We must continue to keep Russia in our side, as also we must go in for multi-alignment the way it is being handled now, and continue to get technology to make India concept a success. And the last but not the least is that the dependency of the world order is so high on China. Decoupling is not going to work out. America has realized. Therefore, they have come onto the terminology called a de-risking and diversification. Let's wait and see how far it is going to take us, whether USA will be successful in this or not, or otherwise. Back to you, Neha.
Thank you for that, sir. There is no doubt that it is a fast-changing world order. The million-dollar question still remains. Following the NATO summit that is being held in Lithuania, what happens to the Russia-Ukraine war? Where does NATO stand? That NATO membership for Ukraine at the moment is off the table. Really leave Kiev and President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is a war that has been on for 17 long months now, and as we said, it has been devastating, it has been debilitating, and it seems to be endless. Remember, Putin had said this war would be over in 2 weeks, and here, 17 months down the road, we are still talking about an ongoing war that clearly poses a threat to the entire world. On that note, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, Major General Sanjay Soy, and Major General Sudhakar Ji, a pleasure having all three of you. Thank you for your time and perspective.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, time for us to take a quick break here on the show. But don't go anywhere, there's lots more coming up on Global Lens.
With all this gear, you must be wondering if I'm climbing a mountain. Well, let me give you a wider look of this place. This is Asia's largest mountain of shame.
A mountain of waste, almost the height of the Qutub Minar.
When you enter capital cities of some of the